A few weeks ago, I made a video about a book I'd finished reading about communism. In this book, they made an accusation that feminism was a communist conspiracy against women that was carried out as part of a psychological warfare program to circumvent the danger of direct conflict through nuclear war. If that's true, then what we call feminism is a profound and pernicious psychological weapon that is very dangerous to women's mental health around the world. And as a therapist, I want to explore this idea that feminism is a form of psychological warfare waged against women and their countries. And this video is just an update of what I've been thinking about since I made that last video on this topic. So, the official objective of feminism is the advocacy of women's political rights. And there's nothing wrong with that, that's all legitimate. But if feminism were something else, if it were a psychological weapon, then it would have secret objectives. And these secret objectives would be something like reduce the birth rates, break down the family, and promote socialist policies through voting. And the reason why these are the kind of objectives that they would have is that if you're a foreign country trying to invade another country, you want to try and reduce the population of that country as much as possible. You don't want them to have way more people than you because that means they've got way more soldiers, scientists, and researchers and engineers. That's a huge threat to you. So if you can shrink the population of that country, you shrink the threat that country has. And a way of doing that is to reduce birth rates. The other thing is you want to break down the family because breaking down the family increases the size of government. See, if you have a strong family, you don't actually have poverty because in a strong family system, the family members take care of the family members who are struggling. The family takes care of those members struggling. But if you break down the family, you have a need for a welfare state. You have a need to have unemployment benefits. You have a need for a healthcare system because the family's no longer covering that, where in the past, when we had a stronger family system, the family took care of those things. And so by breaking down the family, you're promoting a totalitarian state like communism, and that's kind of socialism leads to communism through the breakdown of the family. And the other one would be promoting socialist policies, and this is about manipulating women to vote in a certain way. And I just want to bring up those things because if feminism is ever trying to push those three things, or any of those three things, it's kind of a giveaway that it's not there about serving women's interests, but serving the interests of a foreign government trying to take over our nation, trying to take it over and subvert it, turn it into a communist state. So there are two things that I have looked into since I made that other video, and the first one was like a question that's been on my mind is like, what are the origins of feminism? Like, where did it come from? Now, the word feminism was first used in 1837 in French, but it doesn't seem to have actually got much traction in the English usage for a long time. And we're often told that feminism was born from the suffragette movement over a century ago. However, how sure this is actually true? There's no evidence linking them. And someone can just say, like a feminist university professor who's really a Marxist tells you, oh yeah, feminism came from the suffragette movement. Well, who are you to say that's not true? I mean, you don't have any evidence against that being true, and they don't have any evidence saying that it is true. It just sounds like it might be true. And that's a problem. Like, a lot of the things that we believe about feminism, we're just taking on faith, where there's no evidence or to prove that it is the case. And I did some looking into this, and I'll show you some interesting data that I found. I did a Google Trends search, and I did one of the ones where you can go back in time, so you can go back to 1800, how often the word feminism was used in 1800 and just wasn't used at all. And you can look at how often it was used over time in the printed media, in any kind of printed text, in newspapers, in books, in fiction, non-fiction, and so on. And so, before 1910, there's almost no mentions of feminism in the English-speaking world. It's just not there, in either fiction or non-fiction. But around 1910, it starts to appear more often, and it seems to be piggybacking off the suffragette movement. So suffragettes, that was coming up quite often. Now, I'll see if I can show you the graph there. And suffragettes were a big thing in 1910, and feminism started to become popular after suffragettes became more popular. And in the peak of World War I, that's when you had the peak of the word feminism being most used. Then after the First World War, women got their equal voting rights to men, and then suffragette and feminism both just disappear. Their mentions just kind of fade away, and there's a 50-year period of these words being almost not used at all. Just both of them just kind of disappeared. And that seems really strange, because, feminists kind of present this idea it's a continuous movement that's always existed, and not a movement that, it started and it stopped for 50 years and nothing happened. Like, there's generations in 50 years. At least two whole generations of women there, and they just didn't care about feminism. And then suddenly, you have this explosion in the late 1960s, where there's just heaps of interest in feminism just coming up over and over again in print. Now, I did a little bit of a search for lists of feminist organizations, and I started clicking through just on Wikipedia, really simple thing to do, and just going through, when was that feminist organization founded? When was that founded? And it's like, 1968, 1972, 1980, 1977, so on. And I didn't do a complete analysis of the numbers, but at least 90% of them popped into existence after 1970. So all these feminist organizations just popped up, pop, like mushrooms out of nowhere in the late 1960s through to the 1980s. Just pop, out of nowhere. There was nothing before then, just out of nothing. And that looks very suspicious. That does not look like an organic cultural movement that was building up. It's always been there in the past. It's always been part of women's cultural heritage. No, that looks very artificial when it just suddenly comes out of nowhere. And the other thing is that the frequency that it comes up is rather interesting. So by 1970, feminism is used in print 5 times more often than it was at the peak of the suffragette movement. So when women didn't have equal political rights, they didn't talk about feminism nearly as much as when women did have equal political rights to men. And it gets even more absurd. By 1980, it's mentioned 100 times more often than at the peak of the suffragette movement. Again, when women didn't actually have equal political rights. And so it's like, why is it been, it just kind of looks pushed. It's not evidence. It's not proof. It's not proof. It is evidence. It's not proof, though. But it looks very suspicious. It looks like it was pushed because there wasn't actually a need for feminism, and yet it's way higher than when there actually was, you could argue, a need for feminism. But what's interesting about these dates is they actually coincide with some key dates about the Soviet Union. In that 1964, a Soviet leader, Leonid Brezhnev, came to power, and he radically altered the foreign policy of the Soviet Union. Under the previous Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, they were quite aggressive and quite threatening in the foreign policy, invading countries and being quite violent, putting down insurrections and moving nuclear weapons and so on. Very, very aggressive foreign policy. But under Brezhnev, the Soviet Union kind of went quiet, and there was a kind of a lull, a peaceful calm for about 18 years in the Cold War. And Brezhnev seemed to be a much more patient person than previous Soviet leaders. And he really kicked off this policy of subversion, that you use psychological warfare instead of direct conflict, because you don't want nuclear war. And one of the big criticisms of Khrushchev is that he almost started World War III. He was so aggressive with his foreign policy. But Brezhnev, you couldn't make that claim, but he was a lot more subtle. He used indirect means to try and influence other countries. And so this explosion of these feminist organizations suddenly appearing in the English-speaking world happens just a couple of years after Brezhnev comes to power in the Soviet Union. And then, interestingly enough, after the Soviet Union collapses in 1991, the rate at which feminism is talked about in printed media starts to slow down. And by 1995, just a few years after the Soviet Union collapsed, mention of feminism starts to drop. In fact, it has been dropping every single year since 1995. People are less interested in, well, people are less interested, maybe they weren't interested, but feminism is less talked about and less on people's minds, less promoted, I should say, less promoted, less advertised than it was back in 1995. And what that looks like, it's like suddenly the energy pushing the feminist movement has just gone. Almost like the funding from a foreign state just stopped. And it's been struggling since then because feminism is dropping, almost like it's going back to an organic level around the level it was in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, where there was actually no political inequality for women to oppose. So, very interesting. Anyway, so that's not definite proof, but that's just an interesting thing that I've noticed there. And the other thing I wanted to do was it's almost like serendipity. I came across this book review on Reddit, and I want to read some excerpts from it. I'll put the link to it below, and I'll put a link also to get the book that this book is reviewing. I mean, I've ordered it because I suspect going down that rabbit hole, this is the next book that I want to read. And this book is called Subverted by Sue Ellen Browder, who was a writer for Cosmo in the 1960s, and I presume the 1970s, but they don't explicitly say that in the book review. Anyway, first thing that caught my attention, Browder wrote, "I first learned that lying is a lot easier than telling the truth, and some journalists do it routinely. Lying means you can skip the hard legwork of tracking down reliable sources, so-called real people, who are willing to talk and go on the record. Lying means you can meet tight deadlines with less hassle. Lying means you don't have to even try to get your facts straight, because you just made most of them up." And that sounds a lot like modern mainstream media, doesn't it? And it's actually how communist parties work, like communist countries work. They have like official news agencies, like Pravda was the famous one for the Soviet Union. And yeah, China's got like 30 of them. And they all tell you, they basically make up stories. And it's hilarious if you look at the ones that the Chinese media have been caught making up, faking stories. And you can look them up on YouTube. Very funny. But yeah, that's what they essentially do. And it's like she's describing a culture that you'd find in a communist country where journalists and reporters don't tell the truth. They just make it up. They tell a story. They tell a narrative, because it's all about controlling people, controlling what people think in this war of ideas. Anyway, so Mrs. Browder apparently had a supervisor called Helen Gurley Brown. I know her middle name's Gurley, and she works at Cosmo. That's kind of hilarious. Anyway, she was the editor-in-chief for Cosmo. And she had a message for women. Hard work and sex will set you free as long as you don't have children. And hard work will set you free. Work will set you free. Work makes you free. Arbeit macht frei. Where have I heard that before? It's a really strange thing for her to say, don't you think? Anyway, it's probably just something that was on some gulag, for instance. I don't know, some forced labor camp. Anyway, Browder's job was to sell the idea that for a woman to be fulfilled in life, she has to, 1, work hard, 2, take the pill or some other contraceptive, and 3, if the contraceptive failed, get an abortion. Now, if you remember at the start when I told you about the 3 secret goals that feminism would have, well, how does hard work advance like the interests of women? Like, and when they're talking about hard work, they're not talking about work at home in the family. They're talking about work in the office generally, or in a career. They're not talking about a place at the home. They're talking about get women out of the home, get them out of there. And again, it's like, because you wouldn't want women to ever think that maybe they're the center of the home, and that the heart of the home, and that they're the heart of the family, and that the whole family kind of depends on the women to hold it together. No, women are out there, and that kind of breaks up the family, because you take the woman out of the home, you break up the family, you make the family, the technical term is atomized, and I'll talk about the family more in another video, I'm sure. It's a great topic. for a therapist to talk about. But okay, so first of all, you got something here that doesn't sound like it's in women's interest, because it would be more in women's interest to be at home, to be part of the family, because that's where women find most of their fulfillment in life. And the next one is take the pill or the contraceptive or get an abortion. Again, this is about lowering the birth rate. Why is Cosmo telling women to lower the birth rate exactly what a foreign government like the USSR or China would want us to do? Because if there's less of us and there's more of them, we're outnumbered, outcompeted, we will lose. And this is a lot of people kind of get this hard to understand. Like, you understand when a bomb lands on your country and kills 10,000 people, you kind of go, yeah, that's an attack. But if another country convinces you to halve your birth rate from like 3.5 to 1.7 or whatever it is now, they've actually done a lot more damage than the bomb could have done. They've killed way more people by convincing you not to have children, or in this case, abortion, to murder your own children. They've actually convinced you to do their dirty work for them. Now, she says here in her book, Mrs. Brown pushed the propaganda that women are no different than men and therefore should pursue sex without attachment just like men. And I'm like, oh my god, there's no evidence for this. Like, there is no evidence that women have experienced sex without attachment like men do. In fact, there's no evidence that women experience men like sex like men. It's like, it's just, we're different sexes and we have very different experiences of sex. And yet there's this idea pushed all the time by feminism with no evidence. In fact, all the evidence is against this idea. All the evidence says that women bear a whole different burden in sex because they have to carry a child for 9 months and then they have to breastfeed. And they have all these different psychological elements going on there that men don't have. Men have their own different ones, but they're unique ones for women. And this idea that women are no different than men. And again, it's like, how is this in a feminist movement? If feminism is about women and about, advocating women, you can't. The implication there is that women are good, women are valuable, right? That's something that you get from hearing the word feminism. It sounds like affirming that women and femininity is a good thing. And yet, you've got feminism telling women that the best thing they can do is to stop acting like women and act like men. It's almost like saying, as a woman, you are inferior. Men are better. Act like men because they're better than women. It is not saying that women are good. It's not saying that feminism is good. Femininity is good. What feminists are saying is that womanhood is bad. Femininity is bad. Men are better. And this is the irony, because they go on and on about how bad men are, and yet they're encouraging women to have sex like men, to work like men, and behave like men, and the worst kind of men, and they don't encourage women to be like women. They don't encourage femininity. It seems completely like 180 degree what it should be, and again, that's another thing. Is this an organic movement, or did it pop up as a political movement by a foreign power financed in the 1960s and 70s and through to the 90s to promote things that are self-destructive promote ideas that are self-destructive to the nation, that destroy the family and make you unable to compete with communist regimes? Anyway, so let's go on. Cosmo encouraged the rejection of the outdated code of morality. And this is another thing that really cracks me up. Morality is not a trend. Morality is not something that comes in and out of fashion. Morality is eternal. What is moral 10,000, or what was moral 10,000 years ago, is moral today and will be moral 10,000 years from now. In fact, it will always be the right thing to do. And if you've been educated by a Marxist, you might think that's nuts. A Marxist will tell you that morality is just a matter of opinion. Now, let's look at what's morality. Morality is like telling the truth. And immorality is lying. Dishonesty, deliberately spreading a falsehood. Lying was not cool 10,000 years ago. Lying is not cool today. And lying will not be cool in 10,000 years' time. Lying will always be a bad thing, and honesty will always be a good thing. Again, murder wasn't a great thing 10,000 years ago. Murder is still not a great thing today, and murder will not be a great thing in the future. Neither is theft. And you don't want morality to be just a matter of opinion, because this is a rather sickening joke, but it's actually not really a joke. I don't think it's a joke. 9 out of 10 people enjoy gang rape. The 10th person being the victim. And that's kind of example of mob rule. If you just had a pure democracy, then you could just legalize rape. You could just legalize murder. And morality would just be opinion. And do you want to live in that world? Do you want to live in a world where, oh yeah, we had a big meeting and we decided it's okay to rape and pillage you? Yep, majority rule. Oh yeah, we had another meeting, decided we're just going to kill everyone over there in the next village. Like, how? Why would you ever believe that? Why do you want to live in a world where morality is just a fashion trend? No, morality is eternal, and there are some things that all cultures, all people in all times agree on, and they're basically, thou shalt not bear false witness, and thou shalt not trespass, which, murder is kind of trespassing on someone because you're trespassing with it, if you stab them, you're trespassing on their body. But it's basically those two rules, and they all cultures, all time, have something like that in there. So yeah, morality, yeah, it's not just the latest trend. Anyway, Cosmo also pushed that. Also, Cosmo went so far as condoning the pursuit of sex with married men. And again, how is this helping women? How is this advocating women's interests? This is not what suffragettes were about. The suffragettes would be horrified at this. And yet you've got Cosmo promoting the pursuit of sex with married men, adultery, as being a feminist goal, a feminist value. And it's like, how does it help other women? How do you feel as a woman if you've got other young women being encouraged to try and steal your husband from you, or to sleep with your husband? How do you feel about that? Does that give you a warm fuzzy feeling towards feminism? Because it doesn't make any sense if you're trying to help women. It doesn't make sense to encourage adultery. But if you're a foreign government trying to destroy a country, then promoting adultery in that other country would be a very smart thing to do to try and destroy that country. Okay, so Browder described how she bought into the lie herself when she had her third pregnancy. Faced with a litany of economic hardship brought on by the uncertainty of a career as a freelance writer, she decided to undergo an abortion because she saw a third child as adding to her problem. She has regretted that decision ever since. And this is why. This is why we need to take ideas seriously. Ideas can kill with as much certainty as a bullet from a gun. Ideas killed Mrs. Browder's baby. The idea that abortion wasn't murder, that it was fine, that it wasn't a good time to have that child, and that abortion was a fine way to deal with that problem. That we have to start taking this psychological warfare very seriously. And how much? That's a lot. Killing your own child. Can you imagine living the rest of your life? I mean, there are probably people listening to this who probably have gone through an abortion. They know what exactly I'm talking about. There's probably lots of other people going, have you ever thought about that? The guilt that you would feel, the regret you would feel for the rest of your life. That, yeah, you could have been a mother. You could have had a child. You could have had a family. You could have had a marriage and lived happily ever after. But that was all destroyed. And it wasn't about what you wanted. It wasn't advancing feminism. It was advancing some evil totalitarian regime that you knew nothing about. Oh my god, that's really tough. Yeah, anyway, so Mrs. Brown, the editor of Cosmo, even when the message in her magazine encouraged women to remain single, she herself was happily married. Browder wrote, Mrs. Brown didn't listen to the nonsense we were peddling at Cosmo any more than I did. She was married and by all accounts faithful to the same man for 50 years. She called David her pussycat. This fits perfectly with the hierarchy in communist countries, by the way. So you have an elite of government bureaucrats, or the inner party, and they have their own special houses, estates, and neighborhoods that are sealed off from everyone else. They live in fenced communities. They have special shopping malls, and they get all these luxuries that nobody else. The plebs don't get these things. Like the plebs don't get all the luxuries that the party members in China get. And Stalin actually introduced this system. It was a kind of incentive system to be loyal to the party, that you get all these benefits while everyone else in the country was starving and living in abject poverty. And so this is a big irony. Communists talk about hierarchy, a class of society, yet they establish the most rigid class hierarchy that there is or has ever been. Well, possibly except in feudalism. It really is reinventing feudalism. And so, yeah, the members of the Communist Party see us plebs as being, toys that they can play God with and just experiment with these crazy ideas that they'd never practice themselves. They don't practice any of these values themselves. Like the inner party of the Communist Party are very conservative when it comes to family matters, and yet they're telling everyone else to just have sex and do it and abort their children and cheat with other women's husbands. Like it's really sick. It's very predatory. And again, this is kind of a giveaway that you're not dealing with a movement dedicated to helping women, because they damn well know what's good for women, and they're practicing that in their personal lives, but they're deliberately telling other people not to do those things. Okay, so Browder wants us to know about all the women who bought into the lie and died sick from abortion, complications, or the pill, alone from their years of pursuing meaningless sex, and childless from their years of ignoring the call of motherhood and their maternal instinct. She realized how she had never been happier than when she was a mother taking care of her children, and she reflected on how much her husband meant to her. All these women, they're kind of invisible. The mainstream media will not talk about the women who are the victims of feminism, whose lives have been shattered and ruined beyond belief. They're out there. I see them, I hear them, but you will not see them in Cosmo. You will not see them in a mainstream media outlet. They won't interview them. These women are silenced. Feminism, which is supposedly about giving women a voice, specifically silenced the women who suffer because they followed feminist ideas. And these women are casualties of a psychological war. I actually think it would have been better if someone had just bombed these women or murdered them with poison gas, because at least the dirty work would have been done by somebody else. But these women destroyed their own lives, and they destroyed their own families, and they destroyed their own children with their own hands. And that is particularly cruel, to turn someone's conscience against them by tricking them with bad ideas. Being tricked into self-destruction. And as a therapist, my job is always to when I'm dealing with my clients, is like, stop, think about what you're doing. What are you doing with your life? Are you serving your own interests, or are you being self-destructive? Because, and I've got to add to it now, are you actually serving your interests or the interests of a foreign government trying to destroy your nation? Because this is what I'm seeing. The book is called Subverted, by the way. I will put the link in it below. I think I said that already. This is the psychological war. I'm just seeing more evidence that it's true, it's real, and it's something that we need to think about. And I think it's something women need to worry about feminism, because feminism doesn't seem to be about them at all. It does very much seem to be about furthering the goals of a foreign country taking over our nation. And I just wanted to conclude with the last bit of this book review. I'm probably plagiarizing this. I will link it. Go check it out. Click on the link just for them, because I am drawing so much from it. But I just, and probably buy the book. I'm buying the book. Maybe you should buy the book too. Just that's to relieve my conscience that I'm stealing material from someone else. But anyway, you can tell from her book that perhaps the most important part of Browder's life was her marriage to her dearly departed husband. Her marriage to him had brought her the most happiness and fulfillment that even her career couldn't match. She wrote fondly about the dreams they shared, how they struggled against hardships together, and the love and support they gave each other. Her final chapter talked about her husband's departure from this life. It was clear that life was made so much better for her when she had a wonderful man by her side to share the triumphs and darkest moments in life together. Even with the personal success that Browder attained, her 40 years of marriage to her husband, Walter, mattered more to her than her career ever could. I think there's some very powerful words to reflect on. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting and stimulating. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, per spera ad astra.